Agatha Raisin and the Secret of Doris's Past. A quiet Cotswold village, a humiliated cleaner, and a journalist who knows too much. When a buried past resurfaces, Agatha Raisin finds herself drawn into a scandal that ends in murder. As gossip sharpens into danger, only Agatha's instincts stand between truth and a life destroyed. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Hold it properly, Doris. With conviction, Agatha barked, waving a lemon-yellow cloth like a general brandishing a flag. She had planned the WI Spring Sparkle demonstration to showcase her organizational genius, not to endure the blank stares of villagers who clearly preferred the promise of cake to domestic instruction. The room smelled of polish and sponge fingers, a combination Agatha found oddly threatening. Doris Simpson, small and worried-looking in her faded pinny, stepped onto the little wooden stage with the air of someone about to be sacrificed for harvest rites. "I don't see why I have to be the before," she muttered. "Because you're handy," Agatha snapped, "and because you agreed." "I didn't," Doris began, but the audience drowned her out with a ripple of laughter. Agatha felt her cheeks heat. She had hoped for admiration, or at least grudging respect. Instead, she had become light entertainment. Very well. If they wanted sparkle, she would give them sparkle. She launched into her speech, crisp, brisk, authoritative, only to find half the crowd already whispering about whether the fairy cakes had proper buttercream. She pressed on, demonstrating how to polish brass with professional flair, which was difficult while Doris looked like she had been dressed by a Victorian laundry, and freshly scolded by it too. "Now, Doris, show them how not to—" She never finished the sentence. A sleek woman in a tailored jacket rose from the back row, with the interruption of someone accustomed to making rooms pause for her. "Good heavens," she exclaimed, staring at Doris with bright, triumphant disbelief. "It's you!" The hall went silent. Even the kettle in the tiny refreshment corner seemed to hold its breath. Agatha blinked. "Do you mind?" she demanded. "We are in the middle of—" But the woman ignored her. She stepped forward, eyes fixed on Doris as if sighting a rare and slightly disappointing bird. "Oh, this is extraordinary. I knew I recognized that face, though the name was different then, wasn't it?" Doris went white. The spray bottle in her hand slipped, hit the floor with a crack, and began rolling in a sadly cheerful arc toward the audience. Mrs. Bloxby stood at once. "Perhaps Miss—" "Lydia Green," the woman supplied, turning so everyone could admire her flawless hair. "Lifestyle columnist. London. Though I've taken a cottage here for a bit of rustic inspiration." She flashed a smile that suggested the Cotswolds should feel honoured. Agatha felt her jaw tighten. London journalists were bad enough. London lifestyle journalists were practically weapons. Doris whispered, "I need some air," and hurried off the stage, brushing past Lydia with a small gasp. The hall buzzed instantly, villagers leaning toward one another like gossiping sunflowers turning to the nearest scandal. Agatha forced a smile that felt like it might crack her molars. "Well," she announced, "that concludes the demonstration." She wasn't certain it had actually begun, but no one seemed to mind. They were already drifting toward the tea table, chattering like hens after a fox sighting. Mrs. Bloxby joined her. Poor Doris. She looked terribly upset. "Yes, well, everyone makes too much fuss," Agatha said briskly. "Some woman claims she's seen her before. People see all sorts of things." She didn't believe a word of her own reassurance, but pride insisted she pretend not to care. Clusters formed quickly. Mrs. Phillips declared she'd always found Doris a bit mysterious. Mr. Cartwright claimed he'd once seen her in Evesham, acting shifty near the cheese counter, a remark so idiotic Agatha felt personally offended. Lydia herself stood by the tea urn, accepting adulation as though she'd just solved the village's moral failings. "I simply cannot believe it," she told a swooning knot of WI members. "A face from the past, right under your noses. Oh, what a marvellous idea for a feature, Hidden Lives of Rural England. People adore revelations." Agatha strode over. "We don't exploit our neighbours for stories," she snapped. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Don't we? You must have the most wonderful material here. All these gentle facades. Secrets tucked under gingham like bruised fruit." The comment drifted across the room and landed exactly where Lydia intended, in the centre of every listening ear. Agatha folded her arms. "Doris is a valued member of this community. If you've mistaken her for someone, kindly do so quietly." Mistaken? Lydia laughed lightly. Oh, I remember her well enough. She got away with it once, you know. The nearby murmurs sharpened. Agatha could practically hear speculation fizzing like cheap champagne. Got away with what? Mrs. Cartwright demanded, eyes wide with the thrill of possible wickedness. But Lydia only smiled. I really mustn't say. Professional ethics, she tapped her notebook. But some stories insist on being told. Agatha's irritation burned into determination. Nobody hijacked her event, humiliated Doris, and then waltzed off with hints of scandal. If anyone was going to unearth whatever this nonsense concerned, it would be Agatha Raisin. She, after all, had instincts. Lydia merely had a haircut. Mrs. Blocksby approached, expression gentle. Perhaps Doris would appreciate company, Agatha. She ran out so quickly. Yes, of course, Agatha said, though she wasn't ready to show concern. Concern made one look soft, and Agatha liked appearing sharp, even when blunted. Instead, she lingered at the edges of conversations, catching fragments. Different name, she said. Perhaps it was something to do with that Midlands case. I heard Doris once lived up north somewhere grim. Lydia looked so sure. A clue slipped unceremoniously from the gossip soup. Lydia mentioned her feature on hidden pasts in rural England twice, with smug satisfaction. And once, just once, Agatha heard Lydia purr to someone, "No one stays in the shadows if there's a child in the story." Agatha tucked the phrase into her mental notebook. A woman like that only repeated something when baiting an audience. Red herrings also sprouted like mould, mutterings that Doris had been in trouble once, or that she'd run away from something, or that she had a temper when roused. Complete nonsense. Doris's greatest temper outburst involved banging a teacup too firmly on its saucer. Eventually the crowd thinned, teacups were stacked, and the WI hall settled into its natural post-gossip hush. Lydia packed her notebook with the air of someone closing a successful fishing expedition. Agatha watched her. That woman knew something, or thought she did, and the worst sort of journalist was the kind convinced of her own brilliance. Mrs. Blocksby touched Agatha's arm. Perhaps we should check on Doris now. Agatha hesitated. Showing kindness in public always risked emotional spillage, but Mrs. Blocksby's steady gaze nudged her better instincts. Right, she said, though if she's fallen into hysterics, I'm not fetching smelling salts. They walked only as far as the car park, before Mrs. Blocksby peeled away toward the vicarage, claiming she needed to prepare supper. Agatha continued alone through Carsley, heels tapping crisply against the village pavement. The cottages glowed warmly, windows lit like watchful eyes. Someone had set out a tray of seedlings. Someone else argued faintly about bin days. All perfectly ordinary, except for the knowledge that Doris Simpson, sensible, dependable Doris, might have a past worth shouting about in a WI hall. Agatha quickened her pace. She would uncover whatever nonsense Lydia thought she'd found, and she would do it properly, not with smug hints over fairy cakes. At her own cottage, Hodge greeted her by leaping onto the hallway table and knocking over the post. Agatha sighed, scooped up the envelopes and scratched his chin. If Doris has a secret, she muttered, I'll find it, before that dreadful woman turns it into a side column between organic recipes. Hodge answered with a slow, contented stretch, as though he already knew Agatha wouldn't rest until she did. Doris went home despite herself, keys clenched in her hand, as though leaving was easier than explaining. The next morning, Doris arrived at Agatha's to clean, unusually early, unusually tense. Don't hover, Doris muttered without turning. She was attacking Agatha's kitchen counter with small, furious strokes, as if personal slights could be scrubbed out with lemon spray. Hodge sat on the table, tail flicking with judgment. I'm not hovering, Agatha said, which was untrue. She was standing in exactly the posture of a woman determined to extract information by sheer presence. I simply want to know what that ridiculous Lydia woman meant at the WI hall earlier. Doris straightened a salt cellar that hadn't needed straightening. It was all a long time ago. That, Agatha said, is not an explanation. That is what guilty people say on television before the advert break. Doris froze. I'm not guilty of anything. Then why run out of the WI hall like a startled rabbit? Because she recognized me, that's why, Doris snapped. Now drop it. Agatha opened her mouth, primed with half a dozen pointed remarks. but Hodge chose that moment to swipe a duster from the edge of the table. It hit the floor in a puff of dust, startling both women. Doris let out a startled laugh, brief but real. Agatha felt the tension shift, though not enough to let the matter go. "I only want the truth," Agatha said, softer now. "Well, you're not having it," Doris replied, gathering her things. "Not today." And with that she marched out of the cottage, leaving Agatha seething. She hated being stonewalled, especially in her own kitchen. By evening her indignation had fermented into purpose, and she swept into the Red Lion with the flourish of a woman entering her natural stage. The pub was warm and golden, its chatter rising and falling like domestic birdsong. A cluster of villagers had already formed near the bar, dissecting Lydia's outburst with relish. "I heard she's writing a piece about hidden scandals," Mrs. Cartwright said. No, planning permissions," Mr. Jesson insisted. "She asked me how many sheds you're allowed before you need approval." Agatha planted herself beside them. "She's fishing," she said. "Journalists always fish. Very unreliable breed." Mrs. Cartwright's eyes gleamed. She seemed awfully certain about Doris, though. "She seemed awfully pleased with herself," Agatha corrected. "That's not the same." Her glass of wine arrived, only one, thank you very much, because she was investigating, and she settled in, prepared to steer the conversation. But gossip had its own momentum, and everyone had a theory: tax dodging, an affair, a witness protection scheme. Agatha dismissed each with regal disdain, though her ears stayed sharp for anything useful. Bill Wong appeared, looking tired from paperwork and overexposure to village enthusiasm. "Evening, Agatha." "Oh, good," she said. "You can bring sense to this nonsense." He raised an eyebrow. "Which nonsense?" "The whole business of Lydia recognizing Doris. Tell me what you know." "I'm here for supper, not interrogation." "Nonsense. You can eat and talk." Bill gave in with a sigh and ordered a shepherd's pie. "Lydia Green has a bit of a reputation," he said quietly. "She writes human interest exposés, glossy magazines, tearful victims, villains with bad lighting. She digs." "I could have told you that," Agatha sniffed. "She practically announced herself as the patron saint of other people's misery." Bill leaned closer. "One of the bar staff overheard her on the pub payphone last night. She asked someone to pull old Midland's court files." Agatha's heart gave a triumphant thud. A clue. She masked it with an elegant sip. "And you're only telling me this now?" "I'm not telling you anything official, and I'm definitely not encouraging you." "Of course not," she said sweetly, already encouraged. Before Bill could elaborate, the pub door swung open and Lydia herself swept in, sleek as a cat who owned the place. The crowd brightened around her. Lydia basked shamelessly, telling anyone who would listen that she'd stumbled upon a sensational local story and that rural England was full of unpolished gems. Agatha bristled. Bill watched her bristle. "Agatha, don't—" "I'm not doing anything." She was absolutely doing something, mostly craning to hear Lydia's every word while pretending deep engagement with her coaster. Her attempt at discreet eavesdropping failed, of course. Agatha was many things, but subtle was not one of them. Lydia flicked a glance in Agatha's direction. "Some people," she said loudly, "don't appreciate the importance of truth." Agatha shot up. "Some people confuse gossip with truth." "Gossip," Lydia said, "often leads to truth." "And sometimes it leads to vacuous magazine articles about jam-making," Agatha retorted. The nearby patrons oohed softly, like an appreciative Greek chorus. Lydia merely smiled, the smile of a woman confident she had already won. Bill cleared his throat. "Ladies, this is a pub, not question time." Lydia drifted away, leaving a trail of eager listeners. Agatha sat fuming. "She thinks she's clever," she muttered. "Well, she hasn't met clever." Bill gave her a long look. "Agatha, please don't take this personally." "How else should I take it? She humiliated Doris, disrupted my event, and now she's parading around like the queen of exposés." "You don't even like Doris half the time." "That's beside the point." "Is it?" Agatha glared at him. "I defend my people." Bill wisely focused on his shepherd's pie. Across the room, Lydia was now recounting some story about a farmer who'd faked a crop circle for attention. Agatha leaned forward, unable not to listen. Each time Lydia dropped a tantalizing hint, a woman with a past, a story buried under dust, an identity worth unmasking. Agatha's irritation deepened. Another villager slid into the booth. I heard Lydia's investigating tax evasion, he whispered conspiratorially. All hush-hush. Nonsense, said another. It's an article on dodgy estate agents. Agatha seized both rumours and discarded them with equal disdain. Red herrings, all of them. Lydia wanted something bigger, something that made her eyes gleam when she looked at Doris. The pub grew cosier as the night stretched on, low lights catching the brass fixtures, chatter softening into warm hum. Even the clink of glasses sounded companionable. But Agatha's mind churned. Eventually Bill wiped his mouth and stood. Agatha, whatever Lydia's digging into, let the police handle it. Oh, don't fuss. I'm not about to interfere. He raised an eyebrow. Much, she amended. Please don't, he repeated. But Agatha had already drifted into thought, turning Lydia's cryptic lines over and over. Midlands court files, a face recognized. Got away with it once. Doris's panic. Something had frightened her deeply, and not merely the embarrassment. Agatha finished her wine, stood, and gathered her coat with the drama of someone preparing for battle. Lydia laughed at something near the fireplace. The sound grated. Going home? Bill asked. Going to think. That's what worries me. She ignored him and marched out of the Red Lion, her heels snapping like punctuation marks. The cool evening met her with a breath of air that sharpened her thoughts. Lamps glowed behind lace curtains. A dog barked somewhere. The village settled into its familiar nighttime murmur, unaware that its tidy calm had begun to fissure. Agatha replayed every detail of Doris that morning. The stiff shoulders, the clipped retorts, the desperate need to avoid explanation. People with nothing to hide didn't fold up like frightened origami, and people with something truly awful to hide didn't laugh when a cat knocked a duster onto the floor. So what are you hiding? Agatha muttered to the dark lane. And why does Lydia think she knows it? She reached her cottage, unlocked the door, and stepped into the comfortable muddle of her hallway. Hodge trotted out, weaving between her legs with the quiet entitlement of a creature certain of devotion. Well? Agatha asked him. Do you think Doris is in trouble, or do you think Lydia's just a smug parasite? Hodge blinked, unimpressed by the question and strongly interested in supper. Agatha hung her coat, placed her empty glass on the sideboard, and stood for a long moment in the warm stillness. The house hummed with familiar comforts, the faint smell of lavender polish, the soft rustle of Hodge settling on a chair, the gentle tick of the mantel clock. Yes, she murmured. There's a story here, and it's mine. She switched on the kettle, feeling the first spark of anticipation, sharp, bright, and far more satisfying than the WI demonstration that had begun this mess. If Doris wouldn't talk, and Lydia wouldn't shut up, then Agatha would carve out the truth herself. Behind her, Hodge stretched luxuriously, as if settling in for a long, delicious scandal. You're coming with me, Agatha declared, standing in Charles's doorway as though issuing a royal summons. Charles blinked sleepily. It's 6:30 in the evening, Aggie. Civilized people are still avoiding social contact. Lydia is hosting a drinks party, Agatha said, which means she intends to manipulate the entire village again. I require support and style. That, Charles murmured, is the first honest thing you've said today. But he fetched his jacket anyway. They drove to the hamlet in Charles's wheezing convertible, which sounded as though it resented the outing. The rented cottage glowed with scented candles visible even through the windows, casting a lurid amber that suggested Lydia had mistaken the Cotswolds for a Soho lounge. Agatha inhaled, bracing herself. If she even hints about Doris tonight, try not to wrestle her to the ground, Charles advised. I make no promises. Inside, the atmosphere was indeed ghastly. Cheap Prosecco fizzing in mismatched flutes, bowls of nibbles that looked aggressively organic, and the unmistakable scent of ambition. Lydia glided between her guests like a cat who'd been rehearsing superiority in the mirror. Among the attendees was Malcolm Trent, a slick-haired estate agent wearing a suit that tried too hard. He hovered near Lydia as though hoping to be discovered. Nearby stood Mrs. Edgware, the WI treasurer, rigid and purse-lipped, balancing a flute as though afraid it might stain her reputation. Agatha tugged Charles toward the drinks. Observe the collection, she whispered. An estate agent, a WI martinet, and a journalist. A perfect triangle of doom. Charles surveyed the room. Good crowd for scandal. Agatha began circulating, smiling with the artificial warmth of a woman forcing charm into hostile territory. Her ear caught fragments as she drifted. Lydia, laughing too loudly. Deadly Doreen, they called her. Absolutely dreadful case. Made brilliant headlines, though. Malcolm, bristling. Landlords are always villainized. People don't appreciate the risks. Mrs. Edgware, muttering to a neighbour. Some stories shouldn't be resurrected. It invites trouble. Agatha's instincts twitched. She drifted toward Lydia just in time to see her snap shut a cleaning cupboard door with surprising force. "These owners," Lydia said loudly, "never maintain things properly. Careless. I'll lock this." Heaven knows what could fall out. She pocketed the key. A tiny alarm rang in Agatha's mind. Why lock a cupboard during a party? Before she could investigate, Lydia spotted her. "Agatha Raisin," she purred. "Come to broaden your investigative expertise?" Agatha smiled tightly. "I'm here to enjoy a drink, something you might try." "Oh, I enjoy everything," Lydia replied, eyes glinting. "Even the odd amateur detective wandering about." Charles stepped in swiftly. Now, ladies, play nicely." But Lydia leaned closer. Some people should know when they're out of their depth. Agatha felt her temper stir. Some people should learn the difference between journalism and poking sleeping dogs. "Dogs?" Lydia laughed. "My dear, I'm after much bigger prey." Agatha left before she said something regrettable. Or regrettable for Charles, at least. Outside, the night air cooled her fury. "I'm done here," she snapped. Charles followed. "She got under your skin." "She's a menace, and yet you're fascinated." Agatha refused to dignify that with an answer. Agatha slept badly, waking with the uncomfortable certainty that something had shifted overnight. The next morning, Agatha was halfway through a triumphant retelling of Lydia's behaviour, to Hodge, who seemed unimpressed, when the phone rang. Mrs. Cartwright's breathless voice spilled through the receiver. "They've found her! At the cottage stairs! Terrible fall!" Agatha straightened. "Found who?" "Lydia Green. Dead as anything." Agatha felt a jolt. Shock first, then the unmistakable thrill of drama. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." She arrived to find villagers clustering like pigeons around a dropped pasty. Police tape fluttered across the doorway, and Bill stood grimly at the threshold. "What happened?" Agatha demanded. "Please don't start," Bill muttered. "We think she fell down the stairs, found at the bottom this morning by the cleaner." Agatha peered inside. The cottage looked oddly suspended, as though waiting for a new occupant to rewrite its fate. The staircase loomed narrow and steep. "That woman," muttered Mrs. Edgware behind her, "should have been more careful, drinking like that." "Or pushed," Malcolm Trent said darkly, arms folded. "She was always stirring trouble." Agatha clocked that. A very convenient statement. Bill sighed. "We don't have evidence of foul play." Which meant there was evidence, just not yet labelled. Agatha slipped past a distracted constable and stepped inside, with the confidence of a woman who believed rank laws should bend for her curiosity. The living room was neat enough, apart from a bucket set oddly at the base of the stairs. She frowned. She was certain that bucket had been beside the cleaning cupboard last night. Then she noticed the smear on the banister. Thin, pale, almost waxy. Polish? Dirt? She leaned closer. "Agatha," Bill hissed, "you cannot contaminate a crime scene." "Then label it faster," she snapped, stepping back. "And look at this." He followed her gaze, brow tightening. Her eyes caught something else, a corner of a notebook sticking out from under a rug near Lydia's handbag. Agatha crouched, lifted the edge with one finger, and revealed the notebook, too far from where Lydia had set her things last night. "Why hide this?" Agatha murmured. Bill rubbed his forehead. "For the last time, we don't know this is anything but a tragic fall." Agatha gave him a look that translated roughly to, "Don't insult me." Outside, villagers were already seeding theories like dandelions. "I heard Lydia and Malcolm argued about rents." No. She told Mrs. Edgware she'd expose old WI finances. Someone said she'd threatened that woman from the Midlands case. What's her name? "Doris," Agatha said sharply. They all turned. She regretted speaking, but too late. The rumour machine had taken note. Malcolm stepped forward, jaw tight. "I had nothing to do with this. She made comments about landlords, that's all. People like her think profit is a sin." Agatha narrowed her eyes. His defensiveness was suspicious, and also perfectly estate agent-like. A strong red herring if ever she'd seen one. Bill joined her. "This is going to get ugly," he muttered. "It's already ugly," she replied, "and someone in this village knows more than they're saying." "You're not to investigate," Bill said reflexively. Agatha ignored him reflexively. She surveyed the murmuring villagers, the fluttering tape, the cottage door standing like a mouth about to confess. Fear prickled beneath her annoyance. Lydia had been vile, but she hadn't deserved to end at the bottom of a staircase. Bill exhaled heavily. "Off the record," he said quietly, "I don't like what I'm seeing." Agatha nodded once. "Nor should you." She returned home in a simmering fog of purpose. Hodge greeted her with an imperious yawn from the windowsill. "Well," Agatha told him, hanging up her coat, "it appears we have a murder." Hodge blinked, stretched, and curled up again, as though settling in for an excellent story. Agatha slammed a printed internet article onto her kitchen table so hard that Hodge, who had been peacefully washing a paw, leapt straight into the fruit bowl. "Look at this filth," she declared, "an absolute muckraking." Hodge blinked at her from behind a bruised apple, entirely unrepentant. The headline screamed from the page, "Deadly Doreen resurfaces in rural retreat." Beneath it sat a blurred archive photograph, an image of a much younger Doris Simpson, jaw set, eyes wary, shoulders hunched as though bracing for the world's suspicion. That woman's notes had become tabloid filth overnight. She didn't entirely mind Lydia being dead. Lydia had been insufferable, but the half-finished article was another matter. It had been rushed to press, clearly cobbled together from Lydia's notes and innuendo, and the name Doreen had already begun to spread at breakfast tables throughout Carsley, like jam on gossip biscuits. Agatha grabbed her coat. "I won't have Doris crucified by a woman who thought scented candles were journalistic technique." She marched straight through the village, ignoring looks from neighbours clutching the same tabloid. Mrs. Cartwright called, "Terrible business, isn't it?" in a tone that suggested she was thrilled. Agatha didn't slow. She reached Doris's cottage and knocked sharply. "Open up!" The door cracked an inch. Doris's face appeared, pale and exhausted. "If you're here to say something horrid, don't." "Horrid?" Agatha pushed her way in. "I'm here to ask whether you are or are not a murderess." "Agatha!" Doris squeaked, staggering back. "Well, I can't defend you properly unless I know." Doris drew herself up, dignity wobbling. "I am not a murderess. I was never charged with anything. It was years ago, and it was an accident." "What was an accident? And why were you calling yourself Doreen?" "I wasn't," Doris snapped. "That was them, the newspapers. They made it up." Before Agatha could press further, someone knocked again. Doris sagged. "That'll be Bill." Sure enough, Bill Wong stood on the doorstep with his notebook, wearing an expression halfway between resignation and duty. "Morning, Doris. Morning, Agatha. I prefer to ask questions separately, but since you're already here—" "I'm providing emotional support," Agatha announced. "You're providing noise," Bill muttered. "May I come in?" They settled at Doris's small kitchen table. Doris's hands trembled as she poured tea, and the sight stung Agatha unexpectedly. She softened, slightly. Bill kept his voice gentle. "Doris, we need to clarify the background to this article." "There's nothing to clarify. It happened long ago." "What happened?" Agatha demanded. Doris sighed. "I worked at a guest house in Birmingham. The landlord was horrible. The place caught fire one night. He died. The press needed someone to blame. They decided it was me." Agatha stared. "But did you?" "No," Doris said sharply. "I ran back in to get another girl out. But she'd already escaped. The roof fell in. Everything was twisted afterwards. Reporters hounded me. People shouted things in the street. I moved, changed my name, tried to forget." Agatha's indignation flared. "Those vultures!" Bill nodded sympathetically. "Lydia was investigating that case. She telephoned the Midlands Archives days before her death." Doris's teacup rattled. "She came here, you know, quietly, before she went around shouting. She said she'd set the record straight, make me human again. She asked for reminders, old letters. I shouldn't have given them to her." "Letters?" Bill asked. Doris pointed to a drawer. "Some from my mother, some from other people. They meant nothing, but she said they'd help the story. I thought it might finally die down." Agatha bristled. Instead she waved your past around like the village bunting. A shadow crossed Doris's face. She promised to be kind. Agatha snorted. Journalists promise many things, usually only to themselves. Bill tapped his notebook. "We'll need to find those letters among Lydia's things. They may matter." Agatha leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Doris, I'm afraid this makes you look, well, capable of striking back." Doris glared. "I didn't kill her." "I know," Agatha said quickly, surprising them both. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. Doris visibly wilted. "If that's another reporter—" It wasn't. It was Mrs. Cartwright from the post office, wearing an expression of rubbernecking sympathy. "Just checking you're all right, dear," she said loudly. "Though between us, once a wrong 'un." Agatha shot forward like a launched missile. "How dare you! Doris Simpson is a kind, hard-working woman, and if you repeat that tabloid poison again, I will personally organize a boycott of your postage stamps." Mrs. Cartwright fled. Doris stared at Agatha, astonished. "Why did you do that?" "Because," Agatha said, smoothing her hair, "nobody bullies my cleaner except me." Bill sighed. "Agatha, oh, do stop sighing. Someone killed Lydia. Doris didn't. Therefore someone else did." Doris's lip trembled. "Do you truly believe that?" "Yes," Agatha said briskly, "and I intend to prove it." Bill closed his notebook. "Agatha, don't get involved." "Bill," she replied, "I'm already involved. I was involved the second Lydia called Doris Doreen." "This is police business. And Doris is village business, which means she is my business." Bill rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Just don't interfere." She ignored him completely. They left Doris to rest, though Agatha suspected rest was unlikely with Carsley's rumour mill grinding at full speed. True enough, the walk back to the village was punctuated by side glances, huddled whispers, and the faint rustle of tabloids tucked under arms. At the post office, 2 villagers leaned over the counter. "Well, she always seemed quiet," one whispered. "Those are the ones to watch." "Imagine living next door to someone called Deadly Doreen," the other gasped. Agatha strode between them. "Imagine minding your own business," she suggested. "Refreshing concept." They scattered. Then Mrs. Edgware appeared, face prim with piety. "It's such a shame, but these things do have a way of coming out. One must face one's past." "One must also avoid slander," Agatha replied. "It leads to wrinkles." Mrs. Edgware huffed and stalked off. Agatha continued gathering scraps of overheard conversation, each more irritating than the last. Some insisted Doris had started the fire. Others murmured that her change of name was an admission of guilt. Several weighed the likelihood of her killing again, which made Agatha's blood boil. Back home, she dropped onto her sofa with a groan. Hodge padded over and climbed into her lap, kneading her skirt with possessive determination. "What do you think?" Agatha asked him. Doris bullied, frightened and hiding, and Lydia, dead and smug about it. Hodge purred, unconcerned. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Bloxby stepped inside, carrying a small tin of shortbread. "Thought you might like something to steady your nerves." "I'm perfectly steady." Mrs. Bloxby smiled kindly. "Of course you are." Agatha released a frustrated sigh. "Everyone's treating Doris like the village ghoul. That article is poison." Mrs. Bloxby sat gently. "Doris made mistakes. But she has spent years trying to live quietly. Lydia Green's article has torn open a wound that was never truly healed." "Yes," Agatha said, biting into a biscuit, "which is why I'm going to fix it." "How?" "I'll find the real killer." Mrs. Bloxby nodded, as though this were the most natural sentence in the world. Agatha continued. "Lydia visited Doris before publicizing anything, promised kindness, then turned her into clickbait. She dug up court files, she pocketed those letters, and she locked that ridiculous cleaning cupboard for some reason. Someone didn't want her finishing the story." Mrs. Bloxby tilted her head. Or perhaps someone feared what she'd already found. Agatha paused. "You think Doris—" "I think Doris is frightened," Mrs. Bloxby said softly, "and frightened people sometimes look guilty." A fair point. Infuriatingly fair. After Mrs. Bloxby left, Agatha stood at her window, watching evening drift across Carsley. She saw Doris crossing the green, head down, shrinking from whispering neighbours. A stab of protective anger tightened Agatha's chest. "She doesn't deserve this," Agatha muttered. She grabbed her coat. "If the village insists on treating Doris like a villain, then I must treat her like a client." She marched back toward Doris's cottage, heels snapping. When Doris opened the door, eyes pink, Agatha spoke before she could falter. "I'm taking your case." "My what?" "Your case, your defence, your reputation. Consider me your unofficial representative. Doris looked bewildered. Agatha, I'm not. Yes, well, someone in this village killed Lydia, and I'm going to find out who, which means we need to know precisely what Lydia wanted from you. Doris wrung her hands. She wanted details. About the guest house, about the landlord, about the girl who worked there. She kept asking if I'd ever regretted my actions. Horrible phrasing. Did you? Doris's face crumpled. Every day. Agatha softened. Regret is not guilt. A long silence hung between them. Finally Doris whispered, Why are you helping me? Agatha lifted her chin. Because I cannot abide injustice, and because gossip in this village belongs to me, not to dead journalists. Doris let out a watery laugh. You really are impossible. So I've heard. Back at home, Agatha kicked off her shoes and sank into her armchair with the exhaustion of someone beginning a crusade. Hodge leapt into her lap again, curling into the dip of her stomach. Agatha stroked his back thoughtfully. Well, my boy, Doris may have a past, but she's no murderer. Hodge purred louder, a warm, steady rumble. And if I must prove it myself, Agatha murmured, eyes sharpening, then so be it. Hodge stretched luxuriously, paws reaching toward the fire as if blessing her declaration with feline confidence. You must come at once, Agatha commanded down the phone. It's an emergency. Roy Silver sighed theatrically from London. Darling, unless your emergency involves hair, couture, or a catastrophic shortage of Prosecco, I'm not convinced. It's murder, Agatha snapped, and Doris's reputation is being torn apart by tabloids. I need media intelligence, Roy. Real intelligence. There was a beat of silence, followed by the rustle of Roy rearranging his schedule for the sheer drama of it. I'll be in Carsley by 11. He arrived at 10:30, bursting into Agatha's kitchen in a cloud of aftershave potent enough to stun wildlife. Where's the kettle, and where do you keep your cigarettes? And why do you look like you've aged 6 years since Tuesday? Agatha shoved a mug at him. Never mind that. Lydia Green was digging into Doris's past. Midland's fire, dead landlord, missing maid, and now Lydia's dead. We need to sniff around. Roy perked up. Sniff. I adore sniffing, especially in Birmingham. Gritty, avant-garde, terribly bleak. It's a city, not a fashion collection, Agatha muttered. Drink your coffee, we're driving. Roy stared at the mug in horror. Instant? Yes. I should have stayed in London. But he followed her out anyway, climbing into Agatha's slightly battered car with long-suffering grace. If we die, he warned, I'm haunting you. Birmingham hit them like a slap of noise and exhaust. Pavements thrummed, buses wheezed, and the wind funneled between buildings with determined ugliness. Agatha felt invigorated. Roy looked traumatized. Where is this guest house? He asked. Gone, Agatha said, replaced by offices, soulless ones. The building was indeed a slab of dull grey, with only a small brass plaque to distinguish it from anything else on the street. Agatha eyed it with distaste. Imagine a life ending in such a dreary place. Roy shuddered. Let's find records before my hair collapses. Inside the city archives, Roy instantly transformed. He approached the desk clerk with a dazzling smile. Hello, gorgeous. We're doing research for a nostalgic retrospective on Midland's architecture. Agatha cut in. We need the files on the Gainsley guest house fire, 20 years back. The clerk blinked, caught between flirtation and obligation. You'll need to sign the visitor's book and fill the request slip. Roy snatched the book. Oh, look, Lydia Green signed this. 2 weeks ago. Same file numbers we're asking for. Agatha leaned over the page. So she didn't just dabble, she dug. They were soon seated at a long table with stacks of yellowing clippings, smoke-scarred reports and brittle photographs. Agatha felt a prickle of excitement. Real investigation, real paper, real clues. Much more satisfying than WI gossip. Roy leafed through the clippings with exaggerated delicacy. My nails are weeping. Look at this handwriting, practically medieval. Agatha ignored him. One article leapt out. Landlord dies in midnight blaze and staff questioned. Another. Local maid missing after fire chaos. That must be Elsie Harperton, Agatha murmured. Doris said she ran back into the building. Perhaps Elsie escaped another way. Roy pointed to a photo. Is that Malcolm Trent? Agatha squinted. A younger Malcolm stood beside a police cordon, pointing helpfully toward rubble. The caption read, "Junior Clerk Malcolm Trent assists authorities with details about property irregularities." "I knew he looked oily," Agatha muttered. Even then, a small chill crept over her. Malcolm had been at Lydia's party, smarming around her like a guided missile, and now here he was again, orbiting Doris's past. Roy set the clipping aside. "We need testimony, eyewitness gossip, people who actually remember." Agatha brightened. "I found an old reporter's name in one of the articles. We can track him." Roy blanched. "A retired Midlands journalist?" "Agatha, the decor alone. Stop fretting, we're going." They took a taxi into a quiet suburb of modest semis. The air smelled of cut grass and resignation. Roy touched his chest. "If there are doilies, I'm leaving." The house belonged to Mr. Sidney Parker, a man shaped like a faded armchair. He greeted them with surprise and mild suspicion. "We're looking into the Gainsley fire," Agatha explained, "for background." Sidney narrowed his eyes. That case was trouble, half-truths, lots of noise. "That's exactly why we want clarity," Agatha said. Roy flashed his best smile. "And you, sir, clearly have the air of a man who remembers everything." Sidney softened, flattered. "Lydia Green rang me, you know, asking about the girl who changed her name. She said it was time for the truth to come out." Agatha's pulse quickened. "And did she mention Doris Simpson specifically?" "She did. Asked if I ever saw her argue with the landlord. I said plenty of people argued with him. He cheated staff, fiddled wages. But Doris," he pursed his lips, "well, she gave him a piece of her mind once, loudly, in public." Agatha felt the red herring strike like a spark. "So it looked bad?" "Looked worse in print," Sidney admitted. "That's how they sold papers." Agatha sat back uneasy. That argument would be ammunition for anyone wanting to paint Doris guilty. Lydia must have loved it. Roy closed his notebook, the one he'd held carefully away from all dust. "Thank you, Sidney. You've been wonderfully enlightening." Sidney beamed. Outside, Roy hissed, "Doris argued with the landlord, loudly, publicly. Agatha, that's dreadful optics." "Optics don't interest me," Agatha snapped. "Truth does." But her stomach knotted all the same. They walked back toward the main road, the city hum rising again. Agatha felt the weight of Doris's past pressing into the present like unwelcome fog. Roy rubbed his arms. "I need civilization, preferably edible." They found a cafe that appeared to specialize in beige food and despair. Roy stared at his plate. "Is this a sandwich or a cry for help?" "Eat," Agatha ordered. "We're thinking." Roy poked it delicately. "It's thinking back." Agatha ignored him, scanning her notes. Lydia had pursued the case aggressively. She'd visited archives. She'd called this reporter. She'd identified Doris's new name. She'd poked Malcolm Trent's past. And now she was dead. A puzzle. Messy, but solvable. Roy dabbed his lips with a napkin. "So where next, Poirot?" "Back to the archives. I want every photo with Malcolm Trent's face." Roy groaned, but followed her. They spent another hour digging. Finally, Agatha found it. A photo of Malcolm standing near rubble, expression earnest, eyebrows too symmetrical to trust. Her finger tapped the corner of the image. "Same man," she murmured. "Exact same smirk he used yesterday while discussing rental mould." Roy leaned over. "He does have a villain's hairline." "And he was cozy with Lydia, or trying to be." Roy nodded reluctantly. "And she mocked him in front of guests." "Yes," Agatha said slowly. "And he hated that." She collected the file photocopies, rolled them neatly, and tucked them under her arm. "We're going home." The drive back to Carsley was filled with Roy's commentary on Midlands architecture, Midlands fashion, Midlands air quality, and the Midlands in general. Agatha barely heard him. Her mind spun through connections. Doris, fire, Elsie Harper, missing landlord, dead Malcolm, property irregularities. Lydia had already gone further than anyone realized, further than she had admitted aloud. Back in her cottage, Roy collapsed onto the sofa. "I require restorative alcohol, preferably imported." Agatha ignored him. She spread out the photographs on her table. There he was again, Malcolm Trent, young but unmistakable, standing at the very center of Doris's old disaster. "Funny," Agatha murmured. How the same people keep appearing around tragedy. Roy peered over her shoulder. He does look like a man who enjoys manipulating lease agreements. Agatha didn't smile. He's more than that. He's a thread, and Lydia pulled it. She examined the grainy print, tracing Malcolm's outline with one finger. Then she looked at his clipped smile in yesterday's party recollection, the same smile, the same smug self-assurance. Roy tapped her arm. Could he have killed Lydia? He knew her, Agatha said. He was angry with her. He has history with the fire, and he's the last person she mocked publicly. Roy nodded. So yes. Agatha hesitated. But it feels too neat. Roy slumped against the cushions. Nothing about this case is neat. Agatha gathered the photos. We need more, but Malcolm is no innocent bystander. Roy yawned. I admire you, Aggie, truly. I came expecting mild scandal, perhaps a saucy headline. Instead, we're knee-deep in arson, missing maids and estate agents. Life, Agatha said, is full of disappointments. He grinned. At least you have me. Unfortunately, Roy stood, stretching dramatically. I'll return to London tomorrow. I must recover from all this Midlands exposure. But ring if you need further brilliance. Agatha nodded. I will. After he left, the cottage felt strangely still. Hodge padded in, jumped onto a chair and studied her with slow, feline consideration. Agatha laid Malcolm's photo beside two articles Lydia had highlighted. She found something, Hodge, something that tied him to the fire, and she died before printing it. Hodge blinked. Agatha sighed. And now I must find what she missed. She placed the photos in a neat stack, switched on the kettle, and stood quietly as it rumbled to life. Tomorrow, she murmured. Tomorrow I confront Malcolm Trent. Hodge curled into a tight, satisfied ball as though approving the plan, or merely enjoying the warm patch of chair. Either way, Agatha felt almost comforted. This is an ambush, Agatha announced the moment she stepped into the WI hall. A full-scale ambush, and nobody even bothered to warn me. Mrs. Bloxby, gently herding chairs into rows, smiled in that peaceful way that suggested she had already prepared for Agatha's outburst. It's just a meeting. It's a siege, Agatha corrected, glaring around. Look at them, all perched like vultures awaiting crumbs of scandal. It's unseemly. The assembled WI members shifted, as though startled to find themselves accused before doing anything. In the back row sat Doris, stiff as a cracked teacup, hands clutched together, eyes lowered. Agatha's indignation flared again. Why did you bring her? She hissed to Mrs. Bloxby. Because isolating people never helps, Mrs. Bloxby replied softly. Before Agatha could retort, Mrs. Edgware marched to the front, clipboard under her arm and piety radiating from her like steam. Right, let us begin. This month's topic is honesty, and the importance of transparency, especially regarding one's past. Every head turned, subtle as weather vanes in a windstorm, toward Doris. Agatha felt something electric snap inside her. She stood. If you're proposing that my cleaner, my competent, loyal cleaner, must submit her life story for your inspection, then I suggest you start by emptying your own cupboards first. Mrs. Edgware looked offended, which pleased Agatha. Some individuals, she said primly, have brought embarrassment upon this organization by failing to disclose certain histories. Some individuals, Agatha shot back, should mind their own business before their gossip dries up their insides entirely. Gasps fluttered across the hall like startled pigeons. Mrs. Edgware sniffed. If the press is sniffing around yet again, we must act responsibly. Lydia Green warned me that our accounts— She stopped abruptly, colour rising. Agatha pounced. Your accounts? What about your accounts? That is irrelevant, Mrs. Edgware snapped too fast. The point is that she— a pointed jab of the clipboard toward Doris— should not have hidden who she really is. She's a cleaner, not a fugitive, Agatha barked, and you, Mrs. Edgware, are nothing but a bureaucratic tyrant with a Victoria sponge fixation. The hall erupted into delighted whispers. Several members covered smiles behind hymn-sheet programs. Face blotchy with anger, Mrs. Edgware burst out. Lydia threatened to expose irregularities in our WI finances unless I agreed to answer her questions. She was blackmailing me. Silence fell so heavy even the biscuits seemed to pause. Agatha's eyebrows rose. Was she now? Mrs. Edgware clutched her clipboard like a shield. It was nothing sinister. A few rounding errors. A nearby member whispered, far too audibly, "She was seen leaving Lydia's cottage last week, in a state." Agatha's gaze sharpened. A red herring, perhaps, but a juicy one. Mrs. Blocksby, sensing combustion, quietly guided Doris toward the refreshment table. A few kind souls murmured comfort. One whispered, "Lydia asked me about your child. Terribly personal, really." Doris's breath caught. "She asked you too?" The woman nodded. "Weeks ago, before the article. She wanted old stories." Agatha's pulse jolted. Lydia had been digging earlier than anyone realized. Mrs. Edgware, recovering some authority, banged her clipboard. "This meeting cannot devolve into chaos. We must re-establish standards." Agatha stood again, ignoring the hissed warnings from members nearby. "If this organization treats Doris as a criminal, then I shall resign." A ripple of alarm shot through the hall, but not, Agatha noticed bitterly, for the reasons she wanted. Mrs. Cartwright whispered, "If she leaves, who will organize the Christmas raffle?" Mrs. Trent murmured, "And who will shout at the village fete committee?" "Oh, do be sensible," Mrs. Edgware snapped. "We don't want you to resign. We simply want you to stop shouting." Agatha sat down, deeply offended. "I don't shout," she muttered. Half the room coughed delicately. The meeting resumed, though tension still clung to the air like overbeaten meringue. The hall, stuffy with bodies and Victoria sponge crumbs, felt hot enough to bake another cake. Agatha glared at Doris, who stared at her shoes as though they held salvation. Something twisted inside Agatha, a mix of protectiveness and frustration. She rose abruptly. "I cannot sit through another moment of this hypocrisy." And with that, she swept out of the hall. Outside, cool evening wrapped around her like a reprimand. Carsley's cottages glowed with warm lamplight, a mocking contrast to the pettiness inside. Agatha snatched out her mobile, of the clunky late-90s variety, and jabbed Charles's number. He answered on the third ring. "Aggie, unless you're calling to confess undying love." "Charles," she snapped, "the WI has turned into a battlefield. Doris is being crucified by innuendo, and Mrs. Edgware practically announced she was blackmailed by Lydia before the woman died." "Fascinating," Charles drawled. "Shall I fetch popcorn?" "This is serious." "My dear, everything is serious to you." Agatha ignored him. There were whispers that she was seen leaving Lydia's cottage in a state, and Lydia was asking about Doris's child weeks before her article. "Child?" Charles repeated sharply. "It seems Doris had one," Agatha said, lowering her voice though no one was nearby. "A lost child, as the gossip circles put it." "That adds complication." "It adds motive for someone. Not Doris," she insisted quickly, "but someone." Charles sighed lightly. "Carsley is sounding increasingly lively. I may drive down tomorrow." "You'd better," Agatha said. "I'm drowning in idiots." She hung up with the flourish of someone unsatisfied but dignified. Then she took a long breath, staring across the green. From the WI hall's open windows came faint chatter, gossip regrouping after her exit. Agatha marched home, muttering darkly. Financial irregularities, intrusive questions, private meetings. Half this village had reason to throttle Lydia. Hodge greeted her at the door, tail high in judgment and welcome. Agatha bent to scoop him up. "You would have behaved better," she told the cat, "though I admit you would have clawed Lydia for her perfume." She set him down, switched on the kettle, and replayed the evening with growing certainty. Mrs. Edgware's fear, the whispered sighting at Lydia's cottage, the lost child Lydia had hunted before the article, the villagers' titters, their eagerness for scandal, Doris shrinking under it all. Agatha felt fury rise again, not theatrical this time, but sharp and protective. She despised injustice almost as much as she despised being ignored. The kettle clicked off, steam curling softly. She poured tea, sat, and lifted Hodge onto her lap. His warm weight grounded her thoughts. "Charles is right," she murmured. "I take everything seriously." Hodge pressed his head against her hand. "But that's because someone must. And if the WI wants to transform my friend into public spectacle, then I intend to expose every one of their secrets until Doris is left alone." She sipped her tea, the bitterness satisfying. Her gaze returned to the phone. Charles would come tomorrow. Bill already worried. Roy hovered by telephone in London. Mrs. Blocksby understood more than she said. Malcolm Trent lurked in the background. Mrs. Edgware trembled with guilt, and somewhere beneath all of it lay the truth about Lydia Green. Agatha straightened. "There are far too many people who wanted her dead," she said aloud. Hodge flicked his tail in solemn agreement, or, more likely, irritation that she'd stopped stroking him. Agatha resumed stroking. "Well," she said, finishing her tea, "that's both a problem and a delicious challenge." Hodge stretched, paws tapping her arm as though blessing the chase, and Agatha Raisin, fortified by indignation, tea, and a warm cat, felt ready for battle. "You've dragged me into some idiocy again, haven't you?" Charles asked, stepping out of his convertible with the practised elegance of a man who believed mud should not exist. Agatha folded her arms. "I did not drag you. I informed you. There's a difference." Charles kissed her cheek lightly, infuriatingly. "You sounded breathless on the phone. Irresistible, really." Agatha bristled. It was not breathlessness, it was urgency. Lydia Green was murdered. Doris is being smeared. Malcolm Trent is suspicious, and the WI has declared war. "Then how lovely I came," Charles said, brushing past her toward her cottage. "Where's the food?" "There is no food," Agatha snapped. "We're having lunch at your place." "My place?" Charles groaned. "Agatha, that involves staff." "Precisely." Charles's ancestral house, as always, greeted them with mild decay and the scent of old carpets. Lunch was served in a dining room whose windows framed gentle, hazy sunshine over Cotswold fields. Agatha suspected Charles chose the room purely so his cheekbones could be lit atmospherically. Charles poured wine. "Now then, tell me everything." Agatha did, dramatically, emphatically, with all the nuances only she deemed essential. Charles listened, swirling his wine with bored, aristocratic grace until she reached the part about Malcolm Trent's connection to the Birmingham fire. That caught him. "Malcolm Trent?" he repeated. "The estate agent. Boring man. Too much hair oil." He knew Doris's old landlord, and he was at Lydia's party wheedling. Charles lifted a hand. "Say no more. I shall make inquiries." "You'll actually help?" "Only because the idea of a journalist dying in a rented cottage reflects terribly on local property management. Standards must be preserved." Agatha glared. "You're insufferable." "Darling, that's my charm." After lunch, Charles insisted on a whiskey to fortify himself for proximity to estate agents, which irritated Agatha almost as much as his success in pulling gossip from anyone with a pulse. They drove to a neighbouring market town where a more upmarket estate office stood polished and smug in its window displays. Inside, a nervous junior greeted them. Charles leaned lazily on the desk. "We're looking for some background on Malcolm Trent. Old colleague. We were reminiscing." The junior swallowed. "Mr. Trent hasn't been with us for years." "We know," Agatha said. "Why did he leave?" The junior hesitated. After some unpleasantness." Agatha sharpened. "What unpleasantness?" I'm not allowed to say." Charles slid into a smile. "Of course. Perfectly understandable. But we're trying to trace something important. A woman named Lydia Green came here recently, before her death." The junior paled. "She asked about fires, 2 of them. That old Birmingham guest house, and another, a barn near Mercester." Agatha felt a thrill. "Why those 2? She didn't say, just asked whether Mr. Trent had ever been involved, and if certain transactions were clean. "Clean," Charles repeated. Such a useful, ambiguous word. Agatha's gaze drifted around the office and froze on a framed staff photograph. Young employees smiling awkwardly in cheap suits. Malcolm Trent stood at the edge, half obscured. Beside him was a woman whose face had been scratched out in thick black ink. She stepped closer. "Who vandalized this?" The receptionist flinched. "It was after some trouble. We keep the picture up because it's historic, sort of." "What trouble?" Agatha pressed. "I can't say," the junior whispered. "I'll get in awful difficulty." Charles smiled, the kind that implied secrets offered better protection than threats. "We shall keep confidence." But the junior clamped up, eyes darting to the back room. "I really can't," Agatha seethed. "Fine, we'll find out elsewhere." They left with a photocopy of the picture, Agatha insisted, and Charles returned to his languid stride. "Well, that was unhelpful," Agatha said. "I disagree," Charles replied. "We learned Malcolm has a past, and someone didn't want that woman's face remembered. And Lydia was asking the right questions." "Too many questions," Charles murmured, "for somebody." Back in Carsley, Charles suggested they observe local fauna, by which he meant flirt with Mrs. Edgware at the village shop. Agatha followed reluctantly. Mrs. Edgware perked up like a plant suddenly watered. "Oh, Sir Charles," she breathed, smoothing her cardigan. Charles bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Mrs. Edgware. You look remarkably composed. I'd heard the WI meeting was spirited." Mrs. Edgware coloured. "Some people misunderstand leadership." Agatha snorted loudly. Charles continued. "You knew Lydia Green, I'm told." Mrs. Edgware straightened. "Briefly. She interviewed me for the article. She was fixated on the subject of babies. Adoption scandals, she said, the sort that destroy reputations." Agatha stiffened. "Babies?" Mrs. Edgware nodded primly. "She said rural villages hide more than they reveal, particularly when mothers disappear." Agatha exchanged a look with Charles. Doris's lost child. Lydia had sniffed it out early. "Did she mention Malcolm Trent?" Charles asked casually. Mrs. Edgware blinked in confusion. Why would she? She was more interested in moral failings than property agents. A convenient answer, or simply ignorance. They thanked her and stepped outside. "Well," Charles drawled, "that was illuminating." Agatha fumed. "She tells you things she'd never tell me." "That's because I'm charming." "You're manipulative." "Those qualities often overlap." Agatha marched ahead, annoyed by the ease with which he extracted gossip. She tried the same approach with Doris, villagers, and even Bill, yet Charles floated in, lifted an eyebrow, and entire subplots fell into his lap. They returned to Agatha's cottage before sunset. Charles claimed he needed a whiskey to restore equilibrium after emotional labour. Agatha hissed, "I do the emotional labour." "Yes," Charles agreed serenely, "but I suffer from observing it." She nearly threw a cushion at him. He wandered into the sitting room while Agatha placed the photocopied staff picture on the table. The scratched-out face stared back, or rather, the gouged emptiness where a face should be. Agatha examined the edges. Whoever scratched it out had done so angrily. Not a dainty ink blot, but ragged strokes. Charles peered over her shoulder. "That's not vandalism. That's hatred." Agatha nodded slowly. And Malcolm stood beside her. "Could be his wife," Charles offered, "or girlfriend, or business partner, or someone he wished people would forget." Agatha traced the scratched outline. If Lydia had seen this, she would have chased it. She enjoyed dramatic mysteries. "As do you," Charles said lightly. "This isn't enjoyment," Agatha muttered. "This is necessity." Charles drifted to the drinks cabinet again. "I maintain that whiskey helps necessity." Agatha ignored him, staring at the photograph until the hazy light deepened. One clue sat inside the inked-out void. She felt it, though she couldn't articulate it yet. Whose face had been removed, and why? And what did Malcolm stand to gain or lose by its absence? Charles yawned. "I'll leave you to your brooding, my dear. Do try not to fall into a conspiracy hole before morning." "Go away," Agatha said without heat. He kissed her cheek again, equally without permission, and left. Silence settled. The kettle clicked. Evening thickened. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, the photograph spread before her, copying its details into her mind. Ink strokes. Malcolm's half-hidden smile. Lydia's curiosity. Mrs. Edgware's fear. Doris's shame. Everything looped back to the same threads. Fire, secrets, and children. Hodge padded in and leapt onto the table, planting himself directly atop the photocopy. Agatha gently moved him an inch aside. "Darling, I need to see that." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. She sighed, stroking his back. Someone erased this woman. Someone wanted her gone from memory. Hodge stretched, paws sliding over the paper. Agatha watched his movement, his neat, deliberate scrape across the inked void, and felt a small shiver of recognition. "Scratched out," she murmured. "Not hidden, removed." The kettle sighed behind her. Agatha lifted Hodge into her lap and stared at the picture one last time. "Malcolm Trent," she whispered. "What exactly are you hiding?" Hodge purred, warm and grounding, as Agatha leaned back, mind turning. And so the night unfolded, quiet, heavy with unanswered questions, as Agatha Raisin, armed with a fuzzy photograph and a determined cat, prepared for the next step in the chase. "You're not going to faint, are you?" Agatha demanded, waving the note like a tiny flag of melodrama. Doris sat hunched on her sofa, hands twisted in her lap. "It was under my door, just lying there. Someone knows things, Miss Raisin." Agatha read the note for the third time. Some secrets shouldn't come out twice, she sniffed. Threats always have poor penmanship. This one is no exception. Honestly, Doris, if someone plans intimidation, they could at least invest in better stationery. "This isn't funny," Doris whispered. "I'm not laughing," Agatha replied, though her tone suggested she might consider it later, privately, if it served a narrative purpose. "Did anyone see you find it? Any suspicious characters lurking?" "No," Doris said. "I just opened my door and there it was." Agatha paced the room. "Someone wants you rattled, or wants me rattled, possibly both, which is flattering, really." Doris looked unconvinced. Agatha tucked the note into her handbag. "We're going to the shop, fresh air, and if someone tries something, I shall personally overturn a fruit display on them." Doris didn't fully smile, but her shoulders loosened. They walked together at twilight. The air held a faint drizzle, permissible under the atmosphere rules, Agatha decided, because it served a dramatic tension. The village green glistened softly beneath the street lamps. "I don't like this," Doris murmured. "Feels wrong." "What feels wrong is that I haven't solved this case yet," Agatha said. "Give me more time and I'll have Malcolm Trent trussed up like a roast." She regretted her confidence 5 minutes later. As they turned into Doris's lane, Agatha stopped abruptly. A man stood at the far end, half hidden by a hedge, still, watching. "Good grief," Agatha whispered. "A lurker." Doris made a small noise, something between a sob and a gasp. "Oh, no." "You know him?" Agatha asked sharply. Doris's face tightened. "I can't talk about it." "Well, I can," Agatha declared. "Stay here." "Miss Raisin, don't!" But Agatha was already marching forward. "Hey, you! Yes, you! Skulking like a dodgy shrub! Come out at once!" The man, startled, stepped back and vanished round the corner at an impressive pace. Agatha cursed. "Why do they always run from me?" Doris clutched her arm. "Please don't call the police." "Nonsense. This is precisely the sort of thing Bill needs to hear about. He loves paperwork." Bill arrived 20 minutes later, unimpressed. "So," he said, scribbling, "a man. You saw a man. In a lane." "Yes," Agatha snapped. "A suspicious man." "What did he look like?" Agatha hesitated. "Tallish, or perhaps medium. Hard to tell in drizzle. Hair, probably. Clothing. Present." Bill stared. "Aggie, that describes half of Gloucestershire." "Well, he wasn't half of Gloucestershire," Agatha retorted. "He was one man, and Doris recognized him." Doris stiffened. "I didn't say that." "You did," Agatha said. "You definitely did." Bill pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'll check for recently arrived visitors, but please, no heroics." "When have I ever attempted heroics?" Agatha asked. Bill opened his mouth. "Don't answer that," she snapped. Back at home, just as Agatha began reorganizing her clues board, the phone rang. She grabbed it, expecting Charles. Instead, Roy. "Darling," he breathed, "you won't believe what I've uncovered. If it's a limited edition moisturizer, it's Doris's old surname from Birmingham, Harper, and she had a child. That child was adopted shortly before the fire." Agatha froze. Doris's child? No evidence yet, but the timelines are fascinating. There's definitely a link. Agatha felt a ripple of dread. Lydia had hunted baby stories. Mrs. Edgware had hinted about adoption scandals, and Doris had mentioned a lost child. "Roy," she said quietly, "you've just added an entire new complication." "Isn't it divine?" he said. "Call me tomorrow with more drama." Agatha slammed the phone down and paced, thoughts swirling. The lurker, the note, the child, the fire. Too many threads, and they were tightening. At 8 o'clock, Mrs. Bloxby telephoned. "Agatha, could you come to the vicarage? There's a man here asking for Doris." A chill skittered through Agatha's spine. "The lurker?" "He says his name is Matthew." Agatha grabbed her coat. She arrived at the vicarage ready for combat, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Mrs. Blocksby ushered her into the sitting room, where a man sat perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles bleached white. Ordinary-looking, nervous. A schoolteacher's sort of nervous. Agatha deflated slightly. "You're Matthew?" He nodded. I didn't mean to frighten anyone. I'm looking for Doris Simpson." Agatha eyed him narrowly. "Why?" Before he could answer, Doris herself appeared in the doorway, summoned by Mrs. Blocksby. Her face went pale at the sight of him. "No," she whispered. "No, you shouldn't be here." Matthew rose. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to upset you, but I think you might be my mother." Silence struck the room. Agatha looked from one to the other. "Mother?" she repeated faintly. Matthew swallowed. "I was adopted in Birmingham. Some recent searches suggested my birth mother's name was Doris Harper. Harper was your name back then, before you became Doris Simpson. When Lydia Green made inquiries, I realized I might finally trace her." Doris shook her head violently. No, I can't. This is a mistake." Agatha felt torn between astonishment and irritation. She had been prepared for a murderer, not a meek, trembling, cardigan-wearing teacher with apologetic eyebrows. She cleared her throat. "You're absolutely certain you're not a killer? On the side?" Matthew blinked. "What? No." "Just checking," Agatha muttered. Doris's hands shook. Mrs. Blocksby guided her gently to sit. "Doris, dear, breathe." Matthew stood helplessly. "I only want to talk. My adoptive parents passed away. I've no one left. And Lydia, she asked questions that scared me. I think she wanted to print my story." Agatha felt anger spark again. At Lydia this time. She had no right. Doris whispered, "I gave up a child. Many years ago. I thought it was the only way." Matthew's eyes filled. "I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to know you weren't horrible." Agatha intervened before Doris dissolved completely. "Sit," she commanded Matthew. "Tea will be served. Nobody makes life-changing revelations without tea." They all migrated to Agatha's cottage, Doris clutching her handbag like a shield. Matthew followed timidly, as if fearful she might bolt. Agatha bustled about with forced briskness, boiling the kettle, arranging cups, bossing the universe back into order. Hodge wandered in, sniffed Matthew's shoes, and seemed unimpressed. "Cat," Matthew murmured weakly. "His name is Hodge," Agatha said. "He rarely approves of anyone. Consider that a neutral stance." They sat at the table, Doris trembling, Matthew soft-spoken, Agatha suspiciously attentive. "Let's clarify," Agatha said. "You're Doris's son, adopted shortly after the Birmingham fire." "Around the time of the fire," Matthew said carefully. "The records are messy, but the adoption happened just before it, and the fallout after the fire buried everything." "Before it. My adoption records mention pressure on the mother. No father listed." Doris flinched. Mrs. Blocksby laid a hand over hers. Agatha leaned forward. "And Lydia contacted you?" "Yes. She said she was writing an exposé about lost families. She asked if I'd be willing to speak about my adoption. She mentioned Doris's name before I'd confirmed anything." "Typical Lydia," Agatha muttered. "She dug up everyone's secrets, whether they wanted them or not." Matthew lowered his gaze. "I tried to find Doris gently. I didn't intend to appear lurking." "You did lurk," Agatha said. "Quite effectively." He coloured. "I lost my nerve." Doris wiped her eyes. "Why now?" Matthew hesitated. "Because I thought I'd have time to approach you properly. Then Lydia died, and I worried someone might twist the truth before I could hear yours." Agatha watched the two of them, mother and grown son, sitting stiffly, uncertainty thick between them. A tender fracture ran across Doris's expression, fear, shame, and something like fragile hope. "Doris," Agatha said softly, surprising herself with gentleness, "he's not here to accuse you." Doris nodded slowly. Matthew glanced up. "I'm not here to cause trouble, truly." Agatha cleared her throat. "Well, you've caused enough for one evening, but at least you're not a murderer. That's something." Matthew blinked. "Should that have been in doubt?" "With this village?" Agatha said. "Always." Hodge leapt onto the table, planting himself between them, tail flicking. A silent judge of character. Matthew offered him a cautious hand. Hodge accepted one sniff, then sat, deciding to tolerate his presence. Agatha exhaled. If Lydia had printed her article, Doris's reputation would have been shredded, Matthew's life upended, and the entire village dragged into scandal. Agatha realized something heavy and sharp. Lydia hadn't merely threatened reputations, she had nearly destroyed a family. Doris and Matthew sat awkwardly, gazes flickering with questions decades old. Agatha rose quietly, filled their cups again, and placed a steadying hand on the back of Doris's chair. Whatever secrets still lurked in this case, this moment wasn't meant for tearing open wounds, it was for stitching. She stepped back, watching them. Hodge, now curled between them like an accidental diplomat, stretched, a soft, contented ripple of fur, and the kettle sighed behind her, filling the cottage with ordinary warmth after a night of extraordinary revelations. "Hodge, get off the evidence," Agatha commanded, shooing the cat from Bill's open notebook. Hodge blinked slowly and resettled himself directly on Charles's lap instead, which Charles accepted as if he had personally earned feline devotion. Agatha surveyed her sitting room with satisfaction. "Gentlemen, Doris, this is a case conference. Serious minds solving a serious crime." Roy raised an eyebrow. "Are the serious minds arriving later?" "Don't irritate me," Agatha snapped. "Bill, start with Malcolm." Bill sighed. "Malcolm Trent claims he was showing a cottage to prospective tenants the night Lydia died. They supposedly cancelled last minute by leaving a message on his office answering machine." Agatha leaned forward. "And did he produce this message?" "No," Bill said. "He says it was accidentally erased." Roy snorted. "How convenient." Agatha nodded vigorously. "Anyone with office access could erase that message. Malcolm clearly lied." Charles swirled his whiskey. "People lie for many reasons, Aggie. Boredom, pride, inconvenient truths." "Or murdering journalists," Agatha said. "Let's not forget that one." Bill lifted a hand. "We don't know that, but I'll admit his story is thin." Roy flicked through the photocopies Agatha had collected. "Malcolm's name keeps popping up beside fire damage, dodgy renovations, insurance disputes. He's practically a walking bonfire." "Exactly," Agatha said. "He was mixed up in the Birmingham guesthouse fire. Lydia was digging around that case. She spoke to him, she mocked him at her party, and she scheduled another meeting with him the day after she died." The room paused. Charles finally looked interested. "She had another meeting?" Agatha tapped the notes. "Mrs. Edgware said Lydia cancelled a follow-up meeting with her because the estate agent had promised her something better. Proof the Birmingham fire wasn't an accident." Doris paled. "But it was an accident. It must have been." Bill shook his head. "We may never know, but someone is hiding something." Agatha paced. "Let's summarize. Lydia visited the Midlands archives. She tracked Elsie Harper. She asked about Doris's child. She spoke to Malcolm. She antagonized half the WI. She met Matthew's adoptive trail. She dug into fire records." Roy gasped. She was practically performing investigative journalism. How exhausting. Agatha ignored him. "Everything points to Malcolm. He's at the center. All roads lead to that oily little property agent." Charles sipped his drink. "Aggie, don't fixate." "I'm not fixating. I'm deducing." "Is there a difference?" "Yes," Agatha said. "Fixating is emotional. Deduction is intellectual. I am intellectual." Hodge yawned loudly as if unconvinced. Bill cleared his throat. "There's something else. Malcolm refused to answer questions about a barn fire near Mercester years ago, the one Lydia asked about." Agatha brightened. "There you are. Proof." "It's not proof," Bill said patiently. "It's suspicion." "Well, I'm suspicious," Agatha cried, "and in this village that counts for social fact." Charles chuckled. Agatha swung toward Mrs. Bloxby, who sat quietly knitting. "What do you think?" Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. "I think tempers cloud judgment. Not all wrongdoing is malice. Sometimes it is merely foolishness." Agatha waved this away. "Mrs. Edgware, on the other hand, is absolutely malicious." Bill sighed. "Aggie? No, listen, she had motive. Lydia threatened to expose WI financial irregularities. She had opportunity. She met Lydia privately, and she was seen leaving Lydia's cottage in distress." Charles studied his whiskey. "She also faints easily, gossips compulsively, and panics when asked to calculate change at the fete." "Exactly," Agatha said triumphantly. "A perfect killer hiding in plain sight." Roy groaned. "Aggie, no." But the idea had seized her. She strode to the mantelpiece, seized a stack of clippings, and held them aloft like courtroom exhibits. "Tomorrow," she declared, "I shall confront Mrs. Edgware at the WI subcommittee meeting, publicly." Bill's eyes widened. "Do not confront anyone publicly." "Too late," Agatha said. "Justice calls." Charles murmured to Mrs. Bloxby, "She gets like this." Mrs. Bloxby nodded with fond resignation. "Yes." The WI subcommittee meeting began with the strained formality of a hostage negotiation. Mrs. Edgware sat at the head table, fussing with her agenda sheets. Other members whispered nervously. Doris, wisely, had stayed home. Agatha stood at the back, trembling with righteous purpose. Charles had refused to come. Roy said he had a manicure. Bill claimed he had police work. "That's fine," Agatha muttered. "I work best alone." Mrs. Edgware cleared her throat. "Let us begin with—" Agatha marched to the centre. "Before you begin, I must address a grave matter." Groans rippled. Mrs. Edgware stiffened. "Mrs. Raisin, this is a subcommittee meeting, not a personal soapbox." "Everything is personal," Agatha declared. She held up the clippings. "These articles prove that you had motive to silence Lydia Green." Gasps. A dropped biscuit. Someone whispered, "Not again." Mrs. Edgware blinked furiously. "What rubbish!" "Rubbish!" Agatha thundered. "You were cooking the WI books. Lydia found out, and Malcolm Trent helped you cover it up." Chaos exploded. Members shrieked, chairs scraped, someone fainted. 3 people began talking at once. Somebody dropped a tray of fairy cakes. Mrs. Bloxby appeared at Agatha's elbow. "Perhaps we should all calm down." "No!" Mrs. Edgware wailed, clutching her chest. "I am not a criminal. The accounts were muddled because I am bad at maths. That woman made me so nervous I transposed digits." A collective pause. Mrs. Bloxby said gently, "Yes, dear, we know. I've corrected them quietly for years." Mrs. Edgware turned green, then fainted. Agatha stared in disbelief. "Bad at maths?" The room erupted again. When Mrs. Edgware was revived with tea and indignation, Agatha attempted to salvage dignity. "Fine," she said tartly. "Perhaps you didn't kill Lydia." Several members glared. Mrs. Edgware snapped, "No, I did not, and Lydia cancelled our second meeting because the estate agent had promised her something better. Her words, not mine." Agatha's breath caught. "The estate agent? Malcolm?" Mrs. Edgware nodded grimly. "She said he'd found something that would blow the whole case open. Something about the fire." A hush settled. Agatha drew back slowly. She had been completely, utterly wrong. The meeting dissolved into irritated chatter, wounded pride, and a general sense that Agatha Raisin had, yet again, upended village peace like a terrier in a flower bed. Agatha slipped out before anyone could corner her. She strode across the green with stiff dignity, even though humiliation clung to her like damp laundry. Charles awaited her on her doorstep, leaning against the wall with casual elegance. "So," he said, "how many enemies did you make this afternoon?" "All of them," Agatha muttered. "But that's irrelevant." Charles smiled. "Ah, one of your better outcomes." She shoved past him into the cottage. "I misjudged her." "That does happen." "Don't be smug," Agatha snapped. "I'm not smug. I'm experienced." Hodge trotted into the room, tail high, assessing the emotional temperature like a seasoned diplomat. He hopped onto the armchair and curled up with an air of proprietary comfort. Agatha sank into the opposite chair, rubbing her temples. "I was so sure. I had the motive, the opportunity, the dramatic flair, and all along she was just incompetent at arithmetic." Charles lowered himself onto the sofa. "Human error, Aggie, far more common than murder." Agatha glared. "Why didn't you stop me?" "I tried. You called me insufferable and left." "Well, you are insufferable." "Yes," Charles agreed pleasantly, "but not wrong." Bill arrived without knocking, holding a folder. "Aggie, you caused half the WI to file complaints." "Tell them to stand in line," Agatha muttered. Bill sat opposite her. "I've looked into Malcolm's alibi again. It gets worse." Agatha perked up. "Worse how?" Bill opened the folder. "The couple he claimed he was showing the cottage to? They never cancelled, they never called, they were on holiday in Spain. They've never heard of Malcolm." Agatha's pulse quickened. So he lied. Entirely. Yes, Bill said. He fabricated the whole thing. And the missing message? Doesn't exist. Agatha leapt to her feet. I knew it. That little weasel. He's hiding something. Charles raised a brow. Aggie, calm down. I will not calm down, Agatha shouted. Not when the killer is practically confessing via incompetence. Bill held up a hand. We still have no physical evidence. Then we will find some, Agatha declared. We go after Malcolm. Bill frowned. With what plan? Improvisation, Agatha said. It's my strongest skill. Roy phoned then, his voice shrill. Aggie, darling, I've uncovered something marvellous and terrifying. I'm busy solving a murder, Agatha snapped. I'm assisting. I looked into Lydia's last phone calls. She rang Malcolm 3 times the day before she died, and she told someone, possibly her editor, that she had the missing link. Agatha froze. Missing link? That's what she said. Charles murmured. So Malcolm promised her something that tied the Birmingham fire to something else. Agatha sat slowly. And she died before telling anyone what it was. A silence settled, heavy as fog. Bill closed his folder. You're not wrong about one thing, Aggie. Someone is pushing closer to the truth, and they don't like it. Agatha swallowed hard. Which means they may come after Doris next. Charles leaned forward. Aggie, listen. You misjudged Mrs. Edgware. Learn from it. Go carefully. But Agatha already stood, jaw set, eyes bright with determination. Mark my words, Malcolm Trent is at the centre of this, and tomorrow I'm going to prove it. Bill rubbed his forehead. Please don't do anything dangerous. I never do anything dangerous, Agatha said. The 3 men stared at her. Fine, she muttered. Not intentionally. They left eventually, Bill with warnings, Roy with promises to call again, Charles with a maddeningly affectionate pat on her shoulder. The cottage fell quiet. Agatha sat alone now, staring at the messy pile of notes, clippings and photocopies. The weight of her mistake with Mrs. Edgware pressed on her chest. She hated being wrong almost as much as she hated admitting it. Hodge leapt onto the table, knocking a sheaf of papers to the floor. He sat smugly atop the rest, tail curled neatly around his paws. Agatha frowned at him. You're not helping. Hodge blinked slowly. Agatha sighed. All right, I misjudged her. Happy? He stretched luxuriously. She rested her chin on her hand. I won't do it again. Not with Doris, not with Matthew, not with anyone in this wretched village. Hodge purred, the soft vibration filling the quiet. Agatha leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, determination slowly reshaping humiliation. Tomorrow she would face Malcolm Trent. Tomorrow she would dig deeper. Tomorrow she would stop misfiring. But for tonight, she reached out and stroked Hodge's warm fur, letting his steady presence settle her swirling thoughts as the kettle clicked softly in the background. And in that small domestic stillness, Agatha's resolve hardened. She would not misjudge again. Charles's voice floated down the line with practiced indifference. Agatha, must we do this tonight? The weather's ghastly and Malcolm Trent bores me senseless. Don't be ridiculous, Agatha snapped, fastening an earring with unnecessary force. This is our best chance to pin him down. Lydia rented that cottage through him. If anyone knows what she was doing the night she died, it's Malcolm, and you're the bait. And before you start whining, Agatha added, already jabbing at her mobile, I've told Bill to keep a unit nearby, purely as a precaution. Don't look at me like that. I prefer the term accomplice, Charles said. Bait sounds edible. You'll be whatever I need, Agatha replied, sweeping past Hodge, who blinked at her from the hearthrug with the hauteur of a cat forced to witness human folly once too often. And don't be late. Appearance is everything. Charles naturally arrived 5 minutes late and looking as though the wind had styled his hair for him. Your chariot awaits, he said, leaning on his convertible as though posing for a languid advert. Agatha eyed the car's trembling soft top with suspicion. Couldn't you borrow something less drafty? That would imply effort. Charles smiled serenely. Shall we collect our estate agent? They set off along the lane towards the cottage where Lydia had died, Agatha gripping the dashboard as the wind buffeted the car. The hedges thrashed like disapproving spectators. At least pretend to be sober, Agatha barked over the gale. I'm always sober when confronted with murder, Charles replied pleasantly. It's my only virtue. The cottage sat square and unloved at the edge of a small hamlet, its porch light flickering. Malcolm Trent waited outside, stamping his feet and glancing nervously over his shoulder. His slicked hair had begun to wilt in the wind. "Evening," he called. "Shall we hurry inside? Beastly conditions." Agatha watched him closely, noting his pinched expression and the faint twitch beneath one eye. If guilt had a face, it might look exactly like Malcolm's did under a faulty porch bulb. "Lead the way," she commanded. Inside, the cottage felt oddly preserved, as if holding its breath. The police tape had been removed, but the outline of adhesive still clung to the stair rail. The air carried a faint mustiness, layered with the lingering sweetness of the scented candles Lydia had favoured for her wretched drinks party. Charles gave a theatrical shiver. "Cold little place." "Damp," Malcolm replied. "Comes of being empty. Nothing sinister." Agatha ignored him, letting her gaze drift toward the narrow staircase. Bare wooden steps, a polished sheen, a banister that felt too smooth, unnaturally so. She filed the thought away. "Shall we begin with the reception room?" Malcolm asked, eager to divert her attention. "Plenty of natural light during the day." Agatha moved ahead of him. "Oh, I'm far more interested in utility spaces, practical details, hidden corners." She marched straight to the cleaning cupboard Lydia had been so particular about. Malcolm stiffened, ever so slightly. That was enough to send Agatha's heart leaping with vindication. "This little cupboard," she said, flicking the light switch. The bulb hummed reluctantly to life, illuminating shelves of half-used bottles and a bucket placed askew. "Tenants often treat such areas carelessly," Malcolm muttered. "Oh, I can imagine," Agatha murmured, "especially tenants investigating old fires." Charles leaned in, eyebrows raised. "Subtle," he murmured. "I wasn't aiming for subtle." Agatha crouched to inspect the bucket, adjusting it with exaggerated care. "Curious angle, isn't it? Almost as if someone set things up in a hurry." Malcolm cleared his throat. "I wouldn't know." "No?" Agatha rose smoothly. "Strange. You were very familiar with Lydia's interests. Fires, court cases, Birmingham guest houses." She paused lightly. "Wooden staircases." Malcolm's head jerked. That case involved a metal staircase. Charles's eyebrows shot up. "Was it?" "Funny," Agatha said, "because the archive report described a wooden interior staircase and a separate metal fire escape, and that detail was never mentioned in the papers." Malcolm swallowed. Slip of the tongue. Agatha could feel the blood singing in her veins. "You know far too much about fires for an estate agent, Malcolm. Funny coincidence, isn't it? Properties involved in suspicious fires and you turning up in the background every time. Lydia discovered that. She came here to meet you, didn't she? Confidential documents, wasn't it?" Malcolm's composure cracked. "I didn't... She pushed me. It wasn't supposed to." Agatha stepped closer. "You staged it. Wax polish on the stairs. A little shove. And you assumed the police would call it an accident, because you've made accidents your speciality." Malcolm's breathing quickened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do." Agatha's voice cut cleanly through the stale air. "I've known since you corrected that staircase detail." Malcolm lunged. It happened fast, too fast for Agatha's dignity. His hand clamped around her arm, pushing her back towards the stairs. The polished wood gleamed like a warning. For a brief, dizzy moment, Agatha wondered whether she would become her own cautionary tale. Then Charles moved. To Agatha's astonishment, the usually languid aristocrat grabbed Malcolm by the collar and wrenched him backwards with unexpected force. "I say," Charles panted, "hands off!" Agatha staggered back, clutching her bruised arm. "My mascara," she muttered. "Do you have any idea how long it took to get this right?" Malcolm snarled, twisting free. "You meddling cow! None of this would have happened if that woman had stayed in her place." "Doris?" Agatha demanded. "You're blaming Doris? She did nothing except survive your lies." "Shut up," Malcolm spat, lunging again. But this time the front door burst open. "Police!" Bill Wong's voice cut through the chaos. Bill and a uniformed officer surged inside, pinning Malcolm with swift efficiency. The estate agent fought like a trapped rat, swearing and gasping, but he was no match for trained officers. Agatha pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath. Charles offered her a handkerchief. "You're trembling." "I am not," Agatha snapped. "I'm furious, entirely different." Bill approached her gently. "Are you hurt?" "Only cosmetically," Agatha huffed. "But he ruined a perfectly good evening." Bill shook his head. Agatha, you realize you could have been killed, she sniffed. Bill, honestly, don't be dramatic. Bill gave her a look that suggested he had 10 different objections but no energy to voice any of them. Instead, he turned to the uniformed officer. Cuff him properly. He's slippery. Malcolm snarled as the cuffs tightened. You're all fools. She ruined everything. Doris and her sob stories. Lydia and her digging. If they hadn't, Agatha stepped forward, fire in her eyes. If they hadn't what? Exposed you? Reminded you that you can't burn away the past as easily as you burn properties? Charles winced. Bit dramatic, Aggie. Oh, shut up, she murmured, but without real heat. Bill gestured toward the door. We'll take him to the station. Forensics will go over the cottage again. You did well, Agatha. Reckless, but well. Agatha glowed at the praise, then ruined the effect by hissing, reckless. I orchestrated the entire thing. That's exactly what worries me, Bill replied, ushering Malcolm outside. The wind attacked instantly, swirling leaves in spiteful circles as Malcolm was led to the waiting police car. He shouted one last time, Doris should have kept her mouth shut. It's her fault. Oh, do be quiet, Agatha snapped, slamming the cottage door behind him. Silence settled. Then Charles heaved a dramatic sigh and collapsed onto the nearest chair. Well, that was exhausting. I think I sprained something heroic. Agatha rubbed her bruised arm. You pulled him off me. I'm almost impressed. You should be, Charles said. Heroics are terribly bad for the Constitution. Agatha's pulse still thudded. She wandered to the foot of the stairs, staring upward. The steps gleamed under the dim light, innocent and vicious at once. Wax polish, she murmured. Just enough to send someone flying. Charles joined her, hands in pockets. It was cold, Aggie. Calculated. Agatha swallowed. For all her bravado, the idea chilled her. Malcolm hadn't been a monster in the dramatic sense. No knives, no dark capes. But something worse. Petty, slippery, frightened of losing status. Lydia cornered him, she said softly. She got too close, and he panicked. And you nearly became an encore, Charles looked at her sharply. You must stop flinging yourself at murderers. I wasn't flinging, Agatha sniffed. I was manoeuvring. Charles took her arm gently. Let's get you home. They stepped back into the wind, which tugged at Agatha's coat like an admonishing aunt. Bill was finishing instructions to the uniformed officer. When he spotted Agatha, he softened. Go home. Rest. I'll call you tomorrow. Don't patronize me, Agatha said, but the words lacked vinegar. Charles ushered her into the car, mercifully shielding her from the worst of the gusts. As they drove back toward Carsley, the wind howled over the fields, bending the hedges. Agatha sat very still, her arm throbbing faintly. Charles kept glancing at her with uncharacteristic concern. You know, he said eventually, you're allowed to admit you were frightened. I wasn't frightened, Agatha replied. I was furious. Furious is just fear wearing better shoes. I do not, Agatha declared, wear fear in any footwear. Charles chuckled. If you say so. Lights twinkled ahead as they rolled back into Carsley. A cosy cluster of cottages, warm windows, curtains pulled tight against the wind. Agatha felt the tightness in her chest ease. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until now. Charles parked in front of her cottage and came around to open the door for her. Try not to inspect any crime scenes tonight, he said lightly. Agatha stepped out, wincing at her sore arm. I'll try to restrain myself. Charles hesitated. For what it's worth, Aggie, I'm glad you're all right. Agatha felt heat creep up her neck. Yes, well, someone had to keep you from being bored to death. He kissed her hand with ludicrous gallantry. Until the next corpse, then. She swatted him away, but her smile lingered as he drove off. Inside, warmth enveloped her instantly. Hodge sat on the rug, tail curled neatly, staring at her with a mixture of judgment and expectation. Oh, don't look at me like that, Agatha said, dropping her bag. I've had a day. Hodge blinked slowly. She sank onto the sofa and let out a long breath. The cottage felt safe again. Small, cluttered hers. She rubbed her arm absently. Malcolm's grip had been bruising, but she knew she would embellish it dramatically when recounting the tale to Roy. Agatha replayed Malcolm's final outburst in her mind. None of this would have happened if that woman had stayed in her place, meaning Doris. Always Doris, always the easy target. She felt a deep, unexpected protectiveness twist inside her. Doris had spent years trying to bury a past she never deserved. Lydia had come blundering in, stirring up fire and heartbreak. Malcolm had tried to silence both women for his own gain, and yet here she was, Agatha Raisin, self-proclaimed terror of Castley, suddenly feeling the weight of responsibility for Doris, for Matthew, even for Lydia in some odd, posthumous way. "Oh, really," she muttered. "I'm turning sentimental." Hodge padded forward, leaping lightly onto her lap. She scratched his ears, grateful for something uncomplicated. "Fine," she told him, "maybe just the tiniest bit sentimental." Hodge purred. A kettle clicked in the quiet kitchen, reminding her she had set it to boil before leaving. She pushed herself up with a groan. "Tea, that's what I need. Something soothing, something ordinary." She filled her favourite mug, the one with a chipped rim she refused to throw away, and carried it back to the sitting room. As she settled again, she let the steam warm her face. The events of the evening circled her thoughts. Malcolm's slip about the staircase, his panic, the shove, his hatred for Doris, Lydia's determination, all of it woven into a knot that was finally loosening. Agatha took a sip of tea. "Bill will be unbearable tomorrow," she predicted, full of warnings and lectures. Hodge gave a dismissive flick of his tail. "Yes," she agreed. "I'll ignore him." A small smile tugged at her lips. She had solved it, fairly, cleanly, cleverly, though she suspected Charles would take some of the credit, and Bill would insist she had endangered an active investigation, and Roy would claim he had sensed Malcolm's guilt from the start. But the truth was simple. Agatha Raisin had seen the detail everyone else missed. She had followed the thread from Doris's shame to Malcolm's crimes and tugged until the whole sordid tapestry collapsed. She leaned back, satisfied. "Another case solved," she murmured, "and only minor bruising to show for it." Hodge stretched luxuriously across her knees. Agatha stroked his fur, the fire casting gentle shadows across the room. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we help Doris put her life back together." The kettle sighed behind her, the house settling into its familiar warmth, and Agatha Raisin, bruised, rumpled, triumphant, allowed herself one quiet moment of peace, knowing full well that the next mystery would find her soon enough. Now that the danger had passed, the kitchen felt different, quieter, heavier, real. "I don't know why you've come fussing," Doris muttered, though she was polishing an already immaculate counter with the grim determination of someone scrubbing at memories rather than surfaces. Agatha ignored the remark and marched into the little kitchen with an authority she had absolutely not been granted. "Because you'd only wear a hole into that poor worktop if left alone. Stop cleaning. Sit down." "Now, Agatha," Mrs. Bloxby said gently, easing off her gloves, "we're here simply to keep you company." Doris sniffed and set the cloth aside, though her fingers twitched as if tempted to continue polishing the kettle. A faint smell of disinfectant hung in the air, overly bright for the small cottage. Matthew sat at the table, awkwardly cupping a mug as if tea were a foreign concept. He looked younger today, perhaps because hope had wrinkles of its own. Agatha pulled out a chair and sat opposite him. "Right. You called us. Out with it." Doris shot her a wounded glare. "I didn't call you. Mrs. Bloxby did, interfering lovely woman that she is." Agatha raised a brow. "You think I'd pass up the chance to monitor your emotional recovery? Honestly, Doris, your self-esteem is dreadful." That earned the tiniest snort from Matthew, which he immediately smothered in his sleeve. Mrs. Bloxby clasped her hands. "Doris, dear, Matthew's here, and he deserves to hear things from you, not from newspapers or gossip." Doris sat down heavily. For a moment, she looked so frightened that Agatha's sarcasm dissolved. Doris's hands knotted together, knuckles whitening. "I didn't start that fire," she began quietly. "Heavens know I wanted to leave that place, but I never meant harm. The landlord cornered me one evening, shouted I was lazy, useless, that my baby was a burden. I'd only just had him. He said my baby was a burden. He said I'd lose my job unless I gave him up. They sent him away before I'd even seen him properly." Matthew's breath caught. "You had to?" "I was 17, Doris whispered. "No family who cared, no money, no choice. They sent him away before I'd even seen him properly." Mrs. Bloxby's eyes glistened. "I am so very sorry, Doris." Agatha cleared her throat sharply, caught off guard by the lump forming in her own. "And the fire?" "It started in the back room that night. I'd left hours earlier. Then I heard the shouting and ran back when I realized there was a fire. But the reporters, They made it sound as if I'd done it for revenge. Deadly Doreen, they called me. She winced at the name, as though it still bruised. Matthew reached across the table, hesitating before touching her wrist. I didn't know all that, only bits from old files, and from Lydia. Agatha stiffened. What did she tell you? That my mother had been wronged, that she deserved her story set straight. Matthew gave a small, pained smile. Lydia was determined. Yes, Agatha said dryly, determined to stir up half the Midlands. Doris looked between them both, tears brimming. I thought Matthew would hate me once he knew. Matthew shook his head. I found you. That's enough. A sudden thump interrupted them. Hodge had leapt onto Matthew's lap, settling with imperious ease. The young man froze, unsure whether to breathe. Oh, Doris gasped, a laugh bursting through her tears. He doesn't sit on anyone but Agatha. True, Agatha said with pride. Hodge is a marvellous judge of character, even if he ignores mine. Matthew scratched the cat's ear tentatively. Hodge rewarded him by purring like a small tractor. Doris sobbed properly then, real tears but lighter ones, as though a pressure valve had finally been released. Mrs. Bloxby fetched tissues while Agatha looked away under the guise of adjusting her hair. Emotional scenes always made her feel as if she were wearing the wrong shoes for the occasion. Agatha stiffened. Ever since the article, knocks had stopped being ordinary. Just as the room settled into something tender, a knock rattled the door. Doris jumped. Agatha rolled her eyes. If that's another journalist, I will personally throttle. It swung open to reveal Mrs. Edgware, clutching something round and badly wrapped in foil. I brought something, Mrs. Edgware said stiffly, eyes darting, and I need to speak to Doris privately.